Hi, Brian James at Micro Four Thirds Guy once again. Are the old techniques still worth employing in photography today? Join me and we'll find out. Hi, Brian James at Micro Four Thirds Guy once again. Welcome to the channel. Good to see you. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, hit the little grey link below and hit the subscribe button. It's absolutely free, doesn't cost you anything to do that. And if you hit the bell beside it, it'll send you notifications every time I do upload a new video. Also, if you get the chance, just below there's a thumbs up that tells YouTube that you like the video, and what that does is it spreads the word by getting YouTube to actually promote it to more and more people so they can see the message. So, do we apply the old techniques to modern photography? Is it worth putting all those old skills that we developed years and years ago into modern cameras which can do amazing things? Well, I'll come to a conclusion at the end. I'm not going to tell you quite yet, but keep watching to the end and hopefully you'll get my overall gist on it. But what techniques am I on about? What am I thinking of when I say about the old techniques? Well, very simple. When I first started taking photographs from 54 years ago, I didn't have autofocus. I didn't have in-body stabilization or any type of stabilization going there. I didn't have auto exposure. I didn't have auto aperture, auto speed, anything like that. My ISO was fixed by the film I'd bought to put into the camera, and it was locked until I changed the next film because the sensitivity of the film was locked on that. But we still took some fantastic photos. And if you look at some of the real classic photos over the years, they really were taken on cameras which today would be laughed at. So, are those techniques still relevant when we've got all these new fancy toys? We have computers built into not only the camera but the lens too, so they communicate with each other. Stabilization, where you're moving the sensor thousands of times a second, or you're moving the actual lenses inside the lens barrel to be able to overcome your natural shake of your hands. You're getting autofocus which will work in parts of a second, which will pick up not only the shape of, say, a person, but it'll pick up an animal, treats the animals in a different way, maybe facial recognition, maybe eye recognition. I'm recording this on a camera at the moment which I know is picking up on my eye. The closest eye to you should be the one that is picking up the focus on. Amazing. I'm having to do nothing, it's just sitting there recording. So the cameras will do all sorts of things, but is it still worth bringing in the old techniques? Well, one of the old techniques that I've been looking at recently was the idea of the old adage that you should have the same, no slower shutter speed than the focal length of the lens. Now that was based around the idea of a 35mm film camera, which is your full frame. So if you had a 500mm lens on that film camera, you'd be looking, the slowest speed you should be using would be a 500th of a second to get a clean, in focus, sharp shot. Any lower you're liable to get camera shake. Now we have in-body image stabilization in our cameras now. Some of it in body, some of it in lens, and some combined of the two. And they'll go down to 4, 5, 6, maybe even 6.5 stops of image stabilization. And when I've been doing some of these reviews, I've been reading the comments about people who are really concerned about how well the image stabilization works, how fast the autofocus keeps up, how well the autofocus tracks moving objects, all these sort of things. But we didn't have it in my day. I've been using my Olympus OM1N, my film camera, and the aperture was a ring around the front. It was fully manual. The shutter speed was a ring around the body, fully manual. If I wanted to work out my depth of field, I had to do it in my head. I didn't have the ability to see it through an electronic viewfinder. So I had to work it out. And the lens was always fully open to be able to get enough light in. So if you wanted to try and gauge the depth of field, you had to hit a preview button which would shut the iris down. My film speed, as I say, was fixed. I put a 400 ASA film into this camera and I was stuck for that for the whole 36 exposures. And I couldn't just point and shoot because with only 36 exposures, I was going to be able to film in no time. Each one had to be a keeper. But this idea of, say, looking towards the focal length of the lens compared to the shutter speed, With an in-body stabilization or an overall stabilization, which gives you 3 stops, which today is considered to be poor. But at 500mm lens on a full frame camera, 250 on a Micro Four Thirds, because its angle of view is effectively zoomed into the 500, so it's the same for that. So on a 250mm lens on this, I'd be looking in the old days as a general rule of thumb of 500th of a second. With 1 stop of image stabilization, I'm now down to a 250th of a second. 2 stops, 125th of a second with that 500mm or the 250 on the Micro Four Thirds lens, 125th of a second. So that's with 2 stops, 250, 125, 60th of a second with 3 stops. So with 3 stops, which is considered poor, we're down to a 60th of a second instead of a 500th. 4 stops would give me a 30th of a second, and 5 stops is going to give me an 1/8. Is that right? 500th, 1 stop 250th, 2 stops 125, 3 stops 60th, 4 stops 30th, 5 stops 15th of a second, and 6 stops an 1/8 of a second. An 1/8 of a second to handhold a 500mm lens on a full frame camera and have the camera give you a sharp result. That's unbelievable. But in the old days, we could actually get faster than that 500th of a second. Because some of the techniques we were taught in those days were things like making sure that your feet were properly planted, that you were stable on the ground. Holding your elbows tight in, and holding the camera close and grasping it close into you. That's going to stop some of the shake. Leaning forward into the shot, which again is going to give you more stability. Controlling your breathing. Trying to get rid of your heart rate. In fact, I saw at the weekend, I was at Vindolanda, which is a Roman fort just off the Hadrian's Wall as I was doing my trek, and there was a woman who'd run up the hill to get a better view over the whole of the ancient village there, and she had a point and shoot camera. She was out of breath. She got to the top of the hill and she's clicking away quite merrily, and I'll guarantee that those photographs would have come out sharp. You wouldn't have dared do that in my day, because you knew fine well they wouldn't have with a long lens. So again, taking your time, getting your breathing right. The other thing was knowing that what your subject was. If you're going to take a photograph of something natural, a bird in flight, or motor racing, or something like that, nature shots, you would have set your camera up and your position up so that you were going to be in the best form to take that photograph at the time. It was no good just sort of wandering along and just pulling the camera out and expecting it to work. You would have to set yourself up properly to make sure that you had the best that camera was going to do to be able to have any chance of getting that shot clean, sharp and correct for you. But it's all changed now. Modern cameras will do all this for you. As I say, we've got computers in both the camera and the lens, which is going to get it working for you at its very best. Auto exposure, whether it's auto aperture, auto speed control, or even the ISO. These can all be adjusted in the camera, and what it's going to do is it's going to assess the scene in parts of a second. And not only when it's assessed the scene, it's going to try and work out what's in there, what you're likely to be wanting to take a photograph of. Is there a person in there? If so, can you see the eyes? They're probably going to be wanting to focus on the eyes. What happens if there's more than one person? This is in parts of a second when you first depress that button or hit for the back button focus. Then it's going to check the mechanicals in that lens using fantastic little stepper motors, and it's going to move the focus of that lens in the same way as I have to with a ring around it. It's going to move the insides of that lens to bring that lens into focus. And not only that, it's going to take into account the fact that the lens has a mass which could overshoot that focus and have to be brought back again. All in parts of a second. And if you've got focus tracking on, or continuous autofocus, as you're checking that, each frame it's going to be reassessing every time to try and get that in. If we have an electronic shutter, we could be doing that 60 times a second on some of these cameras. 60 photographs a second, we're going to be doing that. Assessing what we have. What happens if something changes on between the first and the 50th frame where the light changes? It's going to be adjusting all those settings to give you the perfect shot for what it doesn't even know exists, because cameras are fairly dumb. They only know what we program into them. So does it really know that that's what you're wanting to take the photograph of? Does it know that that's going to be the exposure you want? And this is where we have some overrides, for instance, exposure compensation for when it doesn't understand that it's snowing, so you actually need to overexpose because it's going to try and bring it down to too bright. Or if you're taking something in a dark area that you need to underexpose slightly, tell it to take it down a couple of shots, so it's going to bring exposure back up again to bring them in properly, so it's not going to try and over brighten it. This is all done by the camera. But in my day, I'd be taking the photograph, and if I couldn't get it by bracing myself, I'd then look around. If I didn't have a tripod or a monopod, I'd be finding a fence or finding a wall and put myself braced against that, and again bring it in close. But do we need to do that? I've just said the camera's going to do it for us. Well, I believe that we do. I believe that the essence of good photography is still using those same basic techniques, but to improve what we have. And if we can do that, we're going to get shots we would never have dreamed of in the old days with the old cameras. If I'm using my in-body stabilization, say I have a system which gives me 5 stops of image stabilization. Remember, 250mm lens on this is equivalent to 500 full frame, so I've got a 250 on, say, and exposure saying I shouldn't be anything less than a 500 per second, but I've got 5 stops, so that's 500. So bringing down 1 stop is 250, 2 stops is 125, 3 stops is a 60th, 4 stops is a 30th, 5 stops gives me a 15th of a second. So I can go to a 15th of a second, but I'm still on the extreme edge of what the IBIS is able to take. Wouldn't it be better to be sitting in a safe area so that if something does particularly jar me, I've got a safety net? So by using the old techniques, we're actually taking some of the strain off the system. By working out what we want to do in the first place, instead of having the autofocus have to do the whole lot and hunt around the place, if we know approximately where we're going to be and we pre-focus on something in that sort of range, it's going to be faster. But also, if we're doing moving objects, why can't we actually start helping to track it ourselves? Why can't we start using some of those techniques which we were taught in the early days? See, I'm of a slightly different generation. I'm what I class as the third age. We talk about this first, second, third and fourth age of man, and I'm certainly in the third age now. And that's where we get to the reflective part, and we start looking to work out what we actually can get out of the experience and knowledge we have. And this is one of the things I'm really finding as a third age photographer. I'm starting to use some of the techniques which I didn't pay much heed to, but I'm using them automatically. I don't think about the fact that I want to brace, I just brace. And what that's doing is giving my camera a much easier time. And maybe this is where I have problems answering some of the questions that I'm asked about the extremes of, say, autofocus or image stabilization, because I rarely get to the point where I'm using them to the maximum. So where some people are saying they have some real problems with them, I'm nonplussed. I don't see those problems. And it's maybe because I'm stopping those problems from becoming problems in the first place. What do you think? Do you think that we need to go back to the old techniques to really improve what we have? Do we think that the cameras themselves don't need us to do anything like that? Or do you use those techniques? Are you a third age photographer, for instance? I've looked at the age demographics, and there's an awful lot of third age photographers who do follow this channel. But are you one of the younger ones who actually believes that you don't need to be going down those routes? Tell me what you think. Leave a comment below. I'd love to read your comments on this. My name is Brian James. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the channel below. I'd really love you to do that. As I say, it's free, costs you nothing, and what it means is that you're part of our wonderful little community of the people who get together and talk cameras. If you can ring the bell, great. That gives notifications every time I upload a video. And if you have enjoyed it, there's a little PayPal link below if you want to leave me enough for a cup of coffee or to help put some of the fuel in the van for me to go off and do some of my photo treks. Really appreciate it. And a big thumbs up if you would, because that gets YouTube algorithms to spread the word far and wide so more people can see these videos. But the most important thing, whether you brace as you're taking the photo, whether you're using the full automatic facilities in the camera, the most important thing is get out there with your camera, take some photos, enjoy creating images. I'll see you soon. Thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.